Welcome to Retro Video Playback and to episode 2 of Tape Talk Tuesday, an episodic video series where I showcase and discuss various movies on VHS. This episode features the classic horror franchise Friday the 13th, movies 1 through 5. Friday the 13th is a name synonymous with horror, and like it or not, it is one of the most identifiable horror franchises ever, a household name known even to those who are unfamiliar with horror movies. Beginning in 1980, Friday the 13th was a powerhouse through the decade with 8 movies released over the course of 10 years, earning a total of over $226 million at the box office, which is equivalent to over $500 million in 2024. And that's off the total budget of less than $20 million for all 8 movies. By today's standards, $500 million may not seem like a lot for even one movie's earnings, but for the time, and considering the budgets, these are impressive figures and truly demonstrate the popularity of Friday the 13th and the stranglehold they had on movies in the 1980s. Let's take a look at the first 5 movies in the franchise on VHS, arguably the ideal format these movies are to be seen. When movies of this era were made, the filmmakers didn't necessarily anticipate countless rewatches and scrutinization. They were likely expecting the movies to be seen once in a dark theater, which I would say is supported by the fact that most of the movies begin with a summary of the prior installments. With the advent of home media and the gradual improvements from tape to DVD to Blu-ray and now to 4K, we see more and more detail in the movies that we can't necessarily see on VHS. For example, the makeup and effects on Kevin Bacon in the first movie when the arrow goes through his neck is clearly visible on Blu-ray, where on VHS it's less visible as it's the intended darkness that helps mask the makeup. So if you need a reason to watch these movies on VHS, there's a long-winded one for you. Just a brief warning that as I move ahead with discussing each movie, the discussion will contain plot spoilers. With a relatively small budget of $550,000, the original Friday the 13th was released in 1980, making a killing at the box office, earning $59.8 million worldwide. This copy of the VHS was re-released in 1993 after a few iterations of the movie on VHS beginning in 1988. This movie can be credited with kicking off the slasher movie craze of the 80s, and while some would say stole, I would say it borrowed and was heavily influenced by 1974's Black Christmas and 1978's Halloween. Despite the movies that came before it, Friday the 13th really is the movie that sparked a trend of holiday-themed horror movies, including Happy Birthday to Me, My Bloody Valentine, Silent Night, Deadly Night, and April Fool's Day, and summer camp horror movies like The Burning and the Sleepaway Camp series. The front cover of the VHS features the classic movie poster art with the outline of a killer holding a bloody knife. Within the killer's outline is a group of camp counselors huddled together under the moonlight at Camp Crystal Lake. The spines of the sleeve feature the legendary Friday the 13th logo written out and the movie title in plain font on the top of the sleeve, both a part of a uniform design we'll see on the other 4 tapes featured in this video. In addition to the Paramount logo, the barcode, and copyright information, the back of the box features stills from the movie, both interestingly enough from the first act of the movie when things are just being set up. The top still features Brenda at the archery range after a near miss from an arrow, which foreshadows her off-screen death later in the movie, and the other features Ned being pulled from the water by the other counselors after he fakes a drowning, not unlike a scene that would later be found in 1993's The Sandlot, where Squints fakes drowning in the town swimming pool so he can kiss lifeguard Wendy Peppercorn. You know, it's not often that parallels are made between Friday the 13th and The Sandlot, but sometimes it just fits. Bringing focus back to this VHS, the bottom of the backside is complete with a plot summary of the movie. I would declare this movie my favorite of the franchise. Being the original, there's just something unique about it, possessing an odd sense of comfort and familiarity for me, which I know is strange to say about a slasher horror movie. I don't know that a ton of care was given to formatting this movie to VHS and for home televisions, as at the start, after the opening credits when it says Friday, June 13, the present, the words, the present, are cut off at the bottom of the screen. Otherwise, this movie looks and sounds good on VHS and is, I would say, required viewing for VHS fans. The design of the tape is another design that we'll see across the other tapes in the series. It features a white label on each the face and the spine, with a blue Paramount logo and red Friday the 13th in plain font. And no VHS tape would be complete without an FBI warning. Released in theaters in 1981 with a bigger budget of $1.25 million, but a smaller box office take of $21.7 million, this VHS for Friday the 13th Part 2 is from 1994. It features a similar cover to the first movie, though in this case the killer is holding a bloody axe instead of a knife. Additionally, the killer's outline is toned down, and instead of detailed artwork within, it simply reads the title of the movie with a dripping bloody red emphasis on Part 2. The back of the sleeve, in line with the first movie's tape design, on the top half features stills from the movie, and in the lower half is the plot summary. The stills for this movie include the infamous double impalement, a shot of Ginny with Pamela Voorhees' head, Sackhead Jason, and a group of counselors around the campfire where Paul tells them about the legend of Jason Voorhees. An insignificant detail, but on this tape the Paramount logo, barcode, and copyright information were moved from the top half to the bottom. What I like about Friday the 13th Part 2 is that there's a much larger group of counselors. Not only that, but in my opinion, most of them are likable. And, interestingly, and somewhat uniquely, roughly half of them survive Jason's rampage just because they chose to go to the bar that night. It would have been interesting if in one of the sequels they had some of the surviving counselors return, but that unfortunately didn't ever occur. Regardless, this movie ranks highly for me among the other movies in the franchise. After all, it contains the introduction of Jason Voorhees as the killer, bag on head and all. This movie on VHS holds up quite well, looking and sounding as good as the previous movie. We'll see if we can say the same about Part 3. Friday the 13th Part 3, originally released as Friday the 13th 3D, was released in 1982. With a budget of $2.2 million, Part 3's budget was greater than both first movies combined, no doubt to account for the costs associated with making a 3D production. The movie went on to make $36.7 million at the box office, putting it at the second highest grossing movie of the franchise in the 1980s. This VHS, released in 1994, differs greatly from the first two movies in that the sleeve is primarily black rather than white. Interestingly enough, the sleeve does not contain a barcode anywhere on it. Other than these two differences, the rest of the design follows the same general theme as the two movies before it, and the two that come after it. The Friday the 13th logo this time around has more texture, likely to give it more of a pop to fit with the theme of a 3D movie. And speaking of 3D, below the Friday the 13th logo we have a Jason Voorhees silhouette, jabbing outward what I always see as a sword, but is likely supposed to be a knife, elongated to give it a 3D effect, through a shower curtain, blood dripping from its tip. I find this design choice interesting because although we get a shower scene in the movie, the character doesn't actually get killed in the shower as the cover would indicate. We have to wait until Part 4 for a shower kill. And speaking of the shower scene, that's twice I've done that now, on the back of the sleeve we have a still from the aforementioned shower scene featuring Debbie. Alongside it is a still of Chris in the van being grabbed by Jason, now clad in the iconic hockey mask for the first time, Andy crumpled in the rafters, a surprisingly gory still to put on the sleeve, and a group shot of the teens around Abel, the poor attempt of a replacement of Crazy Ralph. I was going to remark the absence of Shelley from any of these stills, but then I remember just how annoying he is in the movie, so it makes sense that he wouldn't make the cut, unlike in the movie. Despite the differences of the sleeve, the tape continues the same uniform design as the other movies. The movie itself starts out with a recap of Part 2, followed by some colorful 3D credits, which look surprisingly good on VHS. While not in 3D, they have a good pop to them. Similarly, the 3D gags throughout the movie, like Harold's stick coming at the screen and the yo-yo being dropped towards the camera over and over, still add a lot of depth, even in 2D. If you've ever watched this movie, especially on DVD or Blu-ray, you might have noticed the dirty lens or film transfer, which even includes a hair on the lens in some shots. This has not improved with further physical releases of the movie, including the most recent 2020 4K scan of the original film negative, which is the same version found in the 40th anniversary Steelbook version from 2022. If anything, the flaws on the lens and film are more noticeable the better the quality the movie is. So, similar to what I discussed in the first movie, and VHS being a more desirable format to watch the movie on because it hides the flaws, the same principle applies here to Part 3. The dirt on the lens exists in this VHS copy, but it's far less noticeable than on Blu-ray. The shots specifically with the hair on the lens or the film don't appear to be present on the VHS, which I believe is because the hair appears in the lower right side of the screen and is cut off for the VHS 4:3 ratio. I have a bit of a hard time articulating this, but something has always felt different about this movie from the rest of the movies in the franchise. Like, it doesn't quite match the rest. I think it has something to do with the cameras that were used to shoot the movie in 3D, giving it a different feel altogether. It might also have to do with the fact that at no point does it feel like it's actually at Crystal Lake, despite references to Higgins Haven being right at the lake. Whatever it is, the movie does have its moments, including Jason getting his infamous hockey mask. Released in 1984, Friday the 13th, the final chapter, had the same $2.2 million budget as Part 3 and went on to earn $33 million at the box office, a little less than I would have expected considering everyone was supposedly going into it knowing it was intended to be the last movie of the series. The cover art of this VHS, which was released in 1994, symbolizes Jason's fate at the end of the movie, which to me is a bit of an odd giveaway, but perhaps it was a means of drawing audiences in. On the spines in the back, we resume the white background design, with stills from the movie of Tommy in his homemade alien mask, one of Axel the pervy coroner with the paramedics and Jason's body, and of the previously foretold shower scene kill featuring Doug, which, let's face it, he earned this one with his obnoxious old buddy old pal bit. I quite enjoy the final chapter. Unlike Part 3, it feels like it belongs in the series with a familiar tone and direction calling back to the first two installments. It features an interesting cast of characters, and the movie is the first movie in the franchise to introduce more than one final survivor. Unlike the first three films that featured a final girl, each movie from Part 4 on has at least two survivors. Finally, we arrive at the final installment of this video, the one with all of the characters we love to hate, Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning, originally released in 1985 with a budget of, yet again, $2.2 million, and a lower box office take of $21.9 million. The cover of this tape, which is from 1994, features an oddly plain hockey mask, which I'll presume is meant to symbolize the new beginning the title of the movie talks about, but it's odd to me that it's a completely different shape of the mask we see throughout the entire franchise. That aside, it's a decent cover with the red light shining through the mask. The stills on the back feature Roy, aka Fake Jason, with the hockey mask with the blue marks, a shot of Pam struggling with the chainsaw, what's up Pam, and a shot of Junior, who's potentially the most annoying character in the entire franchise, with a cleaver to his neck, which is interesting because this isn't actually even in the movie as the shot cuts before it shows this detail, and then it shows his head drop to the ground. This sort of makes sense as the movie was originally notoriously gory, but then it was cut beyond recognition by the MPA, the American Movie Ratings Board. I know that this movie is not typically a fan favorite, especially since we don't get a real Jason Voorhees. But if I'm being honest, I've really grown to like it. It's quite frankly a funny movie, which I don't think was at all intentional, but when you go into watching it knowing it's a so bad it's good kind of movie, it really is a lot of fun. From Reggie the Reckless to his brother Demon and those damn enchiladas, to a really out-of-place dance sequence, to Billy and Lana and a lot of cocaine, to a lot of nudity, there's a lot here to just roll with and enjoy. I think I might have to go pop this tape in when I'm all done here. And with that, we find ourselves at the end of our discussion on Friday the 13th, parts 1 through 5 on VHS, and the end of episode 2 of Tape Talk Tuesday. There's much more to be said on these movies, as well as the other movies in the franchise, about their VHS iterations and otherwise, but perhaps we'll save that for another video. If you have any stories about your experience with the Friday the 13th franchise on VHS, leave a comment and let me know. Thanks for watching Retro Video Playback.